5 months ago, I am sitting in an upstate New York diner in my hometown, sitting across from Nancy King, who was one of my best friends in elementary school, though someone I haven't hung out with since high school for no other reason than we lost touch. And I'm sitting across from Nancy because I have a pressing question for her. One I need to pose in person so I can read her body language as she responds. Nancy, I ask, were you the kind of kid that would have consciously and deliberately maneuvered the pointer on a Ouija board? You see, 50 years earlier, I was one of 3 kids invited to Nancy's 9th birthday slumber party. It was me, Helen Lambert, and Kathy Ferguson. I clearly remember our 4 sleeping bags lined up on the rug of the center lower level room in her split level house, with 2 tiny bedrooms off to the sides, where each of her much older and much cooler teenage sisters slept. One of them even had a top 40 radio station playing the entire night long. In the morning, Nancy's mom made us a big breakfast, and then while waiting for our parents to come pick us up, we pulled out the Ouija board. Now, rather than using it to communicate with spirits, all 4 of us rested our fingertips on the pointer and each asked it one question. Questions like, which teacher will I have for 5th grade? Does Timmy Kavanaugh like me? Will I get my period before middle school? And then it was my turn. I asked the Ouija board, how old will I be when I die? The Ouija board answered. And soon after, my mom picked me up, and life went on. For months and years and decades, my life went on. And while I've never lost sight of that time at Nancy's, nor the Ouija board's reply to my question, it had always just been one of many childhood memories stored in some corner of my mind. That is, until my birthday just over a year ago, when I became fixated on the Ouija board's answer to my question, which, by the way, is a number or an age that is not in my most immediate future. Nonetheless, it is much too soon. So, as I said, I was fixated, actually obsessed. For weeks and weeks after that birthday, I couldn't shake it. So in an effort to let it go, I did what I often do when feeling stuck. I decided to write about it. A story. This story. And in doing so, I consulted with some storyteller friends over food one night. I shared with them what had gone on at Nancy's, how I felt consumed by the Ouija board fiasco, and how I really believed that if I could craft a story with a proper beginning and middle and clear, definitive ending, that I'd be able to move on. That's when one in the group looked up at me from across the table and said, maybe Nancy consciously and deliberately maneuvered the Ouija board pointer. I would have. Finding Nancy on Facebook was not difficult. Not only does she still live in our hometown, but in the very house of the said slumber party. I messaged her, explained that I was working on a piece of writing that had to do with our childhood, and I wondered if she would be willing to meet with me to discuss the matter. She agreed. So now it is this past November on a Sunday morning, and I am sitting in a diner booth across from Nancy King, and we have not seen each other in over 40 years. We ordered coffee, omelets, closed our menus, and I looked up at her. Nancy, at your 9th birthday party, it was you and me and Helen and Kathy. We pulled out the Ouija board. I need to know, were you the kind of kid that would have consciously and deliberately maneuvered that pointer? Her eyes widened. Slowly, her head moved back and forth, and she said, no, never. I never would have done that. And she added, you couldn't pay me to keep a Ouija board in my house now. all perfectly believable. I went on to provide context for my inquiry, and she listened very intently. She also confirmed every single detail that I remembered about sleepovers at her house. Then she blurted out, "You know, though, that Helen, she might have maneuvered that pointer, just as I was thinking, I bet it was Kathy." Kathy had always been the queen bee, and the rest of us just wannabes. Well, at that point, this subject had sort of run its course. There was little else to say on the topic at this moment, and I had Nancy King sitting across from me, and we hadn't talked in decades. So we spent the next 2 hours filling each other in on all the joys and challenges of our respective lives, and it was lovely. And after we parted, I went on to spend the afternoon with my parents, who still live in that hometown, before making the 2-hour drive home to Western Mass later that night. And it was in the dark and quiet of that ride that I got to first revisit my conversation with Nancy from earlier in the day, and the fact that I knew nothing more about the Ouija board's sealing of my fate now than I had the previous week or month. I could find and interrogate Helen and Kathy, I thought. But a growing part of me, a wiser part of me, knew that enough was enough. What I had to do was make peace with this story, my story, not having a clear, definitive, known ending, and that may not be a bad thing, because that means my life doesn't either. Thank you.